Hi there, this is Prague Talk, a podcast from Radio Prague International. My name is Ian Willoughby, and my guest in the first episode of the pod in 2025 is the maker of the biggest Czech film of 2024, Jiří Mádl. Actually, Waves wasn't only the most successful Czech film at the box office in 2024. The movie, which centres on events at Czechoslovak Radio at the time of the Soviet invasion, is also one of the biggest cinema hits the country's ever seen in the modern era. Now Waves is also aiming for international glory. It's made the shortlist of 15 pictures in contention for the Best International Film Oscar, with the actual nomination set to be announced in the middle of January. Just after the shortlist was announced, I caught up with writer-director Mádl, who first found fame as an actor and had made 2 previous films before tackling a dramatic story set in one of the most tumultuous moments of Czechia's modern history. So this is me talking to Jiří Mádl for this edition of Prague Talk. Waves has been a huge success, over 1 million viewers in Czech Republic and Slovakia. I know it's a tough question for you, but why do you think it's resonating so much with cinema audiences?
Well, if I knew the key, I would do it again, but I can't really tell. I think that what we really tried is to make the film clear in many terms. We wanted the emotions to be clear. We wanted the values to be clear, and also the facts to be clear to everybody. Not only like to the audience that knows a bit about the history, but also for the audience that knows nothing. I would call it like an international audience. I'm not saying they know nothing, but quite often like their knowledge of our history is limited. And we also thought of the young audience a lot.
You were born in the second half of the 80s. Why is this topic of the invasion and the subsequent occupation, why does it speak to you?
I wouldn't say that it's the invasion that speaks to me. I wouldn't even say that history speaks to me. What really was important for me was the dilemmas that my protagonists go through, that they need to face. Because I believe that it doesn't really matter where such a story happens and when it happens, because people face these dilemmas. It's just great that we as Czech Republic, we have this history where, once again, it is clear, and it's beautiful to show it in the example of this invasion, that people sometimes take steps that are not beneficial to them, and they know it, and despite that, they take certain steps because they know it's for a good thing.
When I go to the radio, which I do often, at the front of the building there are these plaques with the names of people who were killed and who risked their lives, of course, at the time of the invasion and also at the end of World War II. And I sometimes think, what would I do? What would I have done in that situation? And I have no confidence to say that I would have done the brave thing. Have you thought about this?
Neither do I have the confidence, but certainly once you write the story and you write it from the point of view of the protagonist, which is because that's necessary, so you feel like you have the experience already, so you have to take the decisions for him, because if you didn't do it, it wouldn't feel authentic. And I believe that in those circumstances I would lie if I said that I wouldn't act like him. Now I think I would, because otherwise I would probably never come up with the story. But it is very difficult for people who have children. I believe that it completely changes the game.
I told you this before, I honestly believe you've done a service to your nation with this film. It's such a powerful and brilliant film, which I think really gives a lot to this country. Given that so many people know the story and given the importance in Czech history, did you feel a lot of responsibility to get it just right?
Yeah. No matter what I said, that the history is not the most important thing to me. So once you pick it up, you gotta be careful. And you have to be respectful to people that you speak with or people that you learn about. And at the same time, there are facts and there are recallings that contradict each other. And at the end of the day, it's you who has to take the courageous step and choose the way through the huge bubble of information. So this is what I did. But let's say it's a balance between being respectful and being courageous.
One thing that makes me think also that it's a kind of national film is that there was a special screening for members of the Czech cabinet and the president, so no pressure.
No, really. The biggest pressure was to provide them with the right picture and sound, because where we screened it was like open air place, and I hate it. You know, no matter what atmosphere it has when you screen film outside at night, it always brings this great disadvantage of worse sound and picture. So that was the only issue for me.
But if you're sitting beside the president and he's watching your movie, you don't feel any nerves?
Okay, I do, but it's much heavier when you first screen it to the general audience.
You started working on this project about a decade and a half ago, and I know that part of your research involved speaking to some of the actual people who were in the radio in those days, who are characters in your film. What were some of the things that you learned from speaking to those veteran broadcasters?
I learned a lot of things. So one thing that I would probably find the most idiosyncratic in this way is that no matter what happened afterwards, they haven't seen themselves as losers, because they haven't. You can call it a loss, but in their way they haven't lost themselves. And I love this view that Věra really described me. She was like, "Look at the planet. We're so small, and you feel like your life is very useless, and it is. But just imagine that when you once in your life made something that is right, and you're sure of that makes it much easier to look at the planet again." So that's something that I really kept in my mind and in my heart. That once telling the stories, it was narration of winners.
I know some of those people have died since you spoke to them. Did any of them live to see the film?
Not out of those that are in the movie. There is Mr. Neff, who was very young at that time, and there are some more, but yeah, out of the main protagonists that are involved in the movie, none of them lived to the moment when we screened it.
Who was Rostislav Běhal, who's part inspiration for one of your characters, and what was it that he did that so grabbed you?
He was a program director who was, you could call it an ordinary radio worker, but once he's woken up in the middle of the night and called to the office of Hoffman, who is like the manager of all connections and media and radio, television, everything. It was like a ministry of media. So he called him in the middle of the night, and he came to his office. It was like shortly before midnight, and he gave him a fake message. And he said, "Broadcast this." It was a message saying that the troops are coming to help us, and that the statesmen of the Czechoslovakia actually wanted this to happen. And he said, "This is a lie. I'm not going to broadcast it." And for me, this was probably the most crucial moment of what I read, the main trigger for me to write the story, because I saw the great responsibility that this ordinary man had in his hands. And if he had broadcasted that, we would have probably learned something else about those events nowadays, and the whole world would probably perceive it differently, because there were not so many media that would really dilute the message or contradict it. So he did a brave thing, and very important for the whole nation.
Obviously, it was a long journey to get this film made. What were some of the toughest moments along that journey?
Probably the toughest was when we got refused by the film fund, and the project was developed enough, and we felt it. And then it was like a huge struggle, because it took us back like 6 months back in the process, and it was a very, very hard time. And then there came the war in the Ukraine, and we got the fund, because we went to the fund session on the very same day when the war started. There was very, very emotional moment, and they said, "Okay, we won this movie," but then came the inflation and everything, and all of a sudden 20% of the budget we didn't have, because everything went 20% higher. So you have the budget, and then you don't have it in a week. So there was these two obstacles that went shortly after each other. This was probably the most difficult period of time for me and my producer, Monika.
Speaking of Ukraine, I guess you're asked this quite often, but do you see parallels between the invasion here and what happened there?
I do see the parallels, but it's not the same because, like Ukraine, they knew it would happen. They had been preparing for this to happen some time before they actually invaded them. Who was probably the most surprised was Russia, was surprised by how brave they were. But in the case of Czechoslovakia, it was different. It was unexpected. Well, there were some hints, but it was not like generally perceived as something that would happen. I mean, the army wasn't ready. No one was ready. So it was really, everything was up to the citizens to maybe not to win what was going on, but to find a way to go through it with dignity, with some defiance that was possible without like crazy bloodshed.
How cool was it for you dressing up the front of the Czech radio building to look like in 1968? I guess for one weekend, right?
It was amazing. I whenever you see something on set that is happening for your film, you're amazed, but at the same time you feel the pressure because you feel like, okay, they're gonna close the street, Vinohradská Street, in front of the building because of my film for 2 days. And then you feel the pressure because I always say I feel every minute. I feel the ticking clock when I'm on set, and I feel that every second costs something, and I feel the coin, every crown on my neck. I feel how heavy it is, how cold it is, and that's what I feel when I see beautifully dressed building. I wish I could enjoy it more, but that's what I have in my head.
You make great use of archival footage from the actual invasion in the film. What was your approach to integrating the archival material?
I knew it was a great treasure that we had, because once we tried it, we made a test and we tried to implement it in a short scene that we shot. And once we had the feeling that it could be working, we couldn't get enough of that. We simply tried to implement it as much as we could, because all of a sudden I didn't need to make the choice whether Waves would be more Good Night and Good Luck, like a subtle story, or Argo. I knew I could be Argo. And the only question was how good we can do it, and not to get overwhelmed by that, because still, first you have the screenplay, and then you need to decorate the screenplay with the archive and use it the way you can, but it's more like an affect than changing the storyline.
And was some of the archival material previously unseen or largely unseen?
Yeah, we were lucky to bump into an archive that was never used, and that was good because people feel like they already know the footage because it keeps repeating itself in documentaries, or whenever there's an anniversary, it comes back, and we had some fresh stuff.
Also, I was reading that you used AI somehow on the archival footage.
Yeah, but the problem of artificial intelligence is that it's not intelligent enough. So it can help you with the coloring, but it recognizes a wall, and you give it the information 60s wall, and it makes the facade good, and then it can recognize a tree. But try to bring it a flag or a person moving together with the movement of the camera. All of a sudden there comes the person in the frame, and it's green or red. So once again, you need to do it manually. So I would say if it helped us, it could be 10% maximum.
For me, the first hour of the film is really good, and the second hour is amazing. What was your approach in terms of building up the story, and what impact were you aiming to have on the viewer?
I like this new approach of dramaturgy, which is called roller coaster. I believe that the reason why people like to use it today is the attention span of the audience that nowadays is very small. Like, people need another impulse in the middle of the story. So I used this for the first time in To See the Sea in my first film, then On the Roof has a classical structure, and then with Waves I knew I would come back with this because, I like it when you're climbing somewhere, and then once the audience thinks it's on the top, you say, okay, it is the top, but now we're going down. And I love it. I simply love it.
I know you studied screenwriting in New York, but not for so long, and I also know that you read a lot of books about screenwriting. As far as I know, you didn't study directing. How did you get so good?
I think my great advantage is that I was practically raised on a film set, because I've been on a film set since the age of 15, and all of a sudden you're 30 and you feel like you've been on 40 film sets, so you know the rhythm, you know what people are supposed to do, and I know that as an actor you focus mainly on yourself, but at the same time you understand the stuff, and I think that's my biggest advantage, because you can't really call it an authentic debut once such a person ends up directing.
What directors would you say have influenced you, either ones that you work directly under or ones who you simply admire?
It is definitely Jan Svěrák and Jan Hřebejk. Those are my favorite when I was growing up, but at the same time I need to mention that I never thought of becoming a director, never. But those are the directors that I liked, and then I can name films. I like Home Alone, I love Superman, and no matter how far it seems from what I do, it's very close.
Sometimes we see European directors who reach a certain level, then they go to the US, to LA, with varying degrees of success. Sometimes it works, quite often it doesn't. Is that a path you would consider following?
Yes and no. I've been in this business for quite some time, and I believe that the one thing that never lets you down is your motivation. And my only motivation is to find the best material I can find, to direct it and to bring it to the screen. And going to America or having a good agent in America certainly opens up your options to be getting good screenplays. But it's not the main motivation. I can also get a better screenplay here or write a screenplay for myself. So let's say if it opens up the possibilities of me and Monica, because we certainly want to work together, then I would go for it.
I know recently you were in LA. I guess you were campaigning for the Oscar for Best International Film, and congratulations, you have just been named on the shortlist of 15 films. What was that experience like of trying to get attention for the movie, presuming that your budget for this campaign is probably considerably less than some of the films that you're competing with?
It's probably the smallest budget out of the 15 movies, I would guess. And I guess I'm right. The first time we came to LA, it was a torture, because the understanding what the difference is between us and the others, and that we were not on the map because nobody knew about us. We joined the race very, very late. It's also given by the fact that the Czech Film and Television Academy chooses the candidate in the middle of September, which is very late, and there are movies that are in the race for months who start in Berlinale or whatever, so the whole community already knows them very well.
So how did you do it?
We worked hard. We simply invested our energy in things where we couldn't invest money, and we used the money that we have had smartly. But there's one thing that you need if you want to succeed, and it's the film. It's the film, and of course, if in the part where you're trying to get to the shortlist, it's the part that is not fair, because you need to get their attention and to see the film, whereas others films that pay for their dinners and they pay for everything, and they can really find a way that is very pleasant for the AMPAS voters, which we only had limited tools to do. But once we saw that people liked the film, it kept spreading. The only thing you need to do is not to stand in its way and support it as much as you can. And then every success needs a healthy amount of luck.
And generally, what has been the response when people see it who are not Czech? What's been the reaction?
That is the interesting thing, the most interesting thing for me. You can't really tell if the reactions are the same. The only thing you can judge is the questions that people have at the Q&A after the film. And the questions are the same. They're one-to-one. It's amazing. And not only if you go to LA or if you go to France and we're Denmark and elsewhere, but also if you go to the young audience. We had screening for the schools here, and they were like 12-year-old kids, and they had the very same questions that people have in America after the screenings in LA, and the very same questions they had in Karlovy Vary or elsewhere in the Czech Republic.
Every time I put anything on social media, on Twitter or X, about Waves, it gets a huge response from people. A lot of people saying, for example, in England or America, when will we get a chance to see this movie? What is the plan for international distribution?
The film was already sold to France, to Spain, to Hungary, and I now think Brazil is on the way. But let's say the most important thing is the shortlist that we get now, and that really opens up your options. And I can't tell when and how it will go internationally, but now is the time when it's happening. So I'm hoping it will be soon. But out of the films on the shortlist, there are only 2 films that have no US distributor yet. One of them is Waves, so we're hoping to get one and a good one.
My final question is, what's next for you as a director? I would imagine after this enormous film, it could be nice to do something about, 3 people stuck in an elevator or something like that.
That would be lovely. But I need to find a way between people's expectations and my cravings. So I fell in love with the dynamic and with certain volume that Waves have. And so I would like to go for that, but it certainly doesn't need to be as big as Waves. But it can be. I don't know. I'm trying to keep myself free, and I'm in search of material.
So far, there's nothing you've got lined up as your next project?
There are 2 topics that I'm considering.
Czech television.
No. It was like when I made To See the Sea, I kept getting screenplays about children. I was like, yeah, I can do another one, but it's not that I want to make children films. I want to make films, so it's not that I need to dig in the history again, but I can.
Many thanks indeed for that interview to Jiří Mádl, who I spoke to in mid-December 2024 at a cafe in Prague. And fingers crossed that his movie Waves receives a nomination for Best International Film at the Academy Awards when those titles are announced in about a fortnight's time. Prague Talk is a podcast from Radio Prague International, and if you've enjoyed my conversation with Jiří Mádl, why not check out some of the earlier editions and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. But for now, from me, Ian Willoughby, thank you so much indeed for listening to Prague Talk, and talk to you again very soon.